This episode is presented by Brex, the financial stack founders can bank on. Learn more at brex.com/techcrunch24.
Did you know that the majority of used car dealers in the UK get their stock from auctions? There's an effort to move that process online and make it easier for both car owners and car dealers. You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. Today we're talking to Harry Jones, the co-founder of Motorway, a UK startup helping professional car dealers bid in an auction for privately owned cars. I'm Becca Skutak, and here to talk numbers with me is my special guest host.
Hey, it's me, Kirsten Korosek. And Becca, before we get into our conversation, we have our Two Truths and a Lie segment. At the end, we'll tell you which one of these isn't true. Two Truths and a Lie. First one, Harry and his co-founders built the company in a hospital ward that was about to shut down. Second one, the Motorway team previously considered launching a smartphone unlocking app and grocery delivery service. And finally, Harry drives a Honda E that he describes as if Nintendo built a car.
Ooh, you'll have to keep listening to figure out which one of those things are true and which one is the lie. But before we dive into our conversation with Harry, a quick reminder, as always, to rate and review the show. You can do so wherever you are already listening to this episode, so it is super easy for you and super helpful for us. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Harry. Hey Harry, how's it going?
Hey Becca, good thanks. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about Motorway?
So Motorway is an online marketplace for used cars. We operate entirely in the UK, and our model is that we help consumers, so people like you or I that need to sell a car. We connect you with a network of 5,000 verified car dealers that are interested to buy stock for their business. The way that we do that on the customer side is we have built a really innovative app that enables you or anybody that needs to sell a car to go through the process of creating a vehicle profile with all the images and the data and the information that a car dealer would need to see. And then we've developed a daily online auction, which professional car buyers go to. And through that auction, they're able to access thousands of vehicles every day, and they compete and they bid to give the seller the best offer. So we got started in 2018. We scaled pretty quickly. So a car is sold on our platform every 3 minutes at the moment. Last year, we did a GMV of £2.2 billion. So although we're UK focused, we're growing quite big and we've got pretty big scale here.
So that's obviously a pretty large amount of traction, but take us back to the early days. So the company was actually founded in 2017, correct? And then you launched the following year?
Yeah.
What was the seed of that idea? Because I think maybe it was slightly different. Perhaps you weren't just working with pro dealers then. So what was that like in the first days of the company?
Well, if I take it back even further, maybe even kind of 10 years before we started Motorway, I was working with my two co-founders, Tom and Alex. And we've been working as a founding team for a long time. And Motorway is actually the fifth company that we started together. But even kind of like 10 years before starting Motorway, we'd always had an interest in the car industry. We're not car people, we're not dealers, we're not kind of your petrol heads or anything like that. But it always sort of intrigued us as being such a big category, which just hadn't seen the same kind of technology disruption or improvements in customer experience that you saw in other areas. And way back then, so that would probably be 2007, we had this idea about building an online service for test drives. So the idea was if you're interested in buying a new car, any make or model, you could come to our website and arrange a test drive, which seemed to be really hard to do at the time. I don't know if you remember, manufacturer websites would have these kind of really cool, like glossy Hollywood videos showing off their latest vehicle, but you couldn't really transact. So that was kind of when we first started thinking about cars. And then around 2017, when we went to look at that, we saw that landscape had changed. So you had OEMs like Tesla, where you could order direct from them. All other OEMs had got kind of much smarter about being transactional. But we realized that no one had solved the sort of flip side of this coin, which was how do you sell a car? If you're the owner of a car and you need to get rid of it for whatever reason, how do you do it in a way that's like fast, easy, convenient, and maximizes the value in the car that you've got? So that's where we got started in 2017. And you're right, our original idea was more like a kind of price comparison website. So the idea that we kind of had was that you could put in your license plate and your mileage, and we'd go off and we'd ping a whole bunch of different car buying companies and they'd pull all their prices back. we kind of displayed in a table like you see on a travel comparison site. People would pick the highest price and they'd sell their car that way. We realized that definitely had the product market fit on the consumer side. People didn't have a way to kind of compare prices and see all these different offers. But in terms of the overall experience, we weren't kind of really moving it forward. We were just sort of getting people on the website and they were clicking out. And then typically this price they'd seen on our website was just a headline price. And when they went and spoke to the car buying company, the price would fall. And, we weren't sort of really improving the experience at all. So that was our kind of V1. And then after a year or so of doing that, we decided we needed to do a big pivot. And we'd been speaking to some car dealers and we realized that if we worked with the dealerships directly, and if we were able to present the vehicles in a much more detailed way, then the dealerships would be able to give a much more accurate price online. And they would even compete with other dealerships to offer the most for the cars they really wanted. So that pivot was really critical in how we kind of evolved the company.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in the pivot, but also just your process, because you've started all these companies and going all the way back to, say, 2007, which I'm putting my mind back there. It's like the Great Recession's happening. Things are very different online. What was your process of thinking through different ideas? Because what became Motorway is very different from what that general idea is. And do you use the same process as founders for deciding the pivot? Like, are you constantly just like peppering each other with questions? Give us a little bit of a behind the curtain look at like how you come up with the idea, but then also how you sort of decide when to change course.
Sure. The first thing is, as a founder or an entrepreneur, you've got to get comfortable with the idea of change. And back in 2007 and even earlier when I was working with my co-founders, we'd spin up different ideas and websites and apps on an almost kind of monthly basis. So it was a very kind of creative time to be alive because it was the sort of early days of the internet and of Web 2.0, and there was just so much kind of opportunity to go after. So we would look to try and deliver value, what's now known as kind of lean methodology. We'd look to try and deliver value to market as quickly as possible by just building really small, scrappy things, even if they were just one-page websites. And when you kind of pull on the string a bit and you found one that was getting some traffic or some good conversion, we go a bit further and build it out further. And that was the same kind of approach that we've taken with Motoway. And even to this day, that idea of change is a pretty common thread, because in any business you're going to start, you never really know how it's going to go and what the outcome will be. So the change happens frequently. It's really a think about getting comfortable with it.
And I know we're talking a little bit about the company building process here. And something else I wanted to ask you about, once you guys decided to sort of add that piece on where people can actually buy and sell their cars through the platform, I noticed the fact that you guys work with dealers sets you apart from some of the other companies in this space. There's quite a few competitors over here in the US, like Carvana and Cars.com and things like that. You sell to them and then they sell to someone else. It feels a little more peer-to-peer. Yeah. Whereas this, you obviously have that layer in the middle of the dealers. And I'm curious, like, why that made the most sense for you guys to add in that layer when you were setting up this marketplace.
Sure. So I think a couple of reasons. First of all, it felt important to us that our skills and where we felt we could add value was in the service layer and the experience and the technology. So we never really aspired to be one of these companies where you're actually going to hold all the inventory yourself and have, millions of dollars of cars sticking around, because I think, we do a pretty bad job of that, not being kind of car experts. So that kind of drove it. But we also realized we could be much more efficient by operating in that way. We could move much more quickly by leveraging dealerships who are actually purchasing the vehicles. And dealerships sometimes get a bad rep, but I think they provide a huge amount of value actually in that economy. So they take care of receiving the vehicles, reconditioning them back to retail condition. So they're kind of like the original recyclers and reusers. They do a great job of that, and they take a lot of risk in terms of whether the car's going to appreciate or depreciate, and they provide services like warranties and finance. So when you actually kind of scratch into it, dealerships are a pretty important part of this ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
I have a dealership question for you, because in the US, as you noted, and the company I know is founded in the UK, but in the US, dealerships have a terrible reputation, right? And a lot of the startups that have focused on this space have all been about cutting out the dealer and you don't have to deal with the dealer anymore. Is the archetype of the shady dealer like a global phenomenon? Like in the UK, do people feel the same way about dealers, or is that just a US-centric issue?
I think, unfortunately, it probably exists here as well. And I remember when we first got started, someone showed me a survey that said that dealers were the most sort of disliked people just after real estate agents, which was kind of, interesting. But I actually think that's kind of an outdated sort of trope. And dealerships, we work with 5,000. That's about half of all the dealerships in the UK. But we really try to work with dealerships who are entrepreneurial and they're kind of like us. They want to grow their business. They want to provide great customer experiences. And for us, that's the right kind of dealership. And they definitely exist out there. And I think that segment's growing as well.
Have you spent any time studying the difference between customer interactions in the UK versus the US? Like as you were building the business, must have been something that you looked at potentially for expansion in the future. What's the takeaway? Like how different is it? And what is that specific opportunity that existed in the UK that maybe doesn't elsewhere?
So we've spent some time looking at Carvana and speaking to various other kind of automotive entrepreneurs in the US as well. And I'd say that probably the consumer behavior of dealer behavior is not that different. What's sort of interesting about the UK is it's an island market. So all our steering wheels are on the wrong side of the car if you've ever visited the UK, and we drive on the wrong side of the road as well. So that makes it a great market to start in because it's pretty self-contained. It's not like in the States where cars might trade from east to west coast over huge geographies and stuff. In the UK, it's pretty easy. Even if you're selling a car up in Edinburgh in Scotland, you can feasibly sell it to a dealership in the south and move it. So it was a great kind of market in terms of geography and in terms of how we're set up with automotive to get started. That's not to say it wasn't challenging. A lot of times along the roads, we get this sort of feedback, dealerships are never going to get on board with that idea, or consumers don't want to deal with dealerships. They want to sell peer to peer. So these are all kind of challenges that we had to sort of work through as we built the company.
And staying on the expansion piece for a second, of course, people in the UK drive cars. There's a market there. You guys have been able to sort of be successful in that space. But it's definitely not as a car-centric kind of an ecosystem as, say, the US. Like most families here, it's like everyone has their own car. People buy them really frequently. And there's definitely less of an emphasis on public transit here in the US and more of an emphasis on cars everywhere. Everything is set up for cars for the most part. So how do you guys think about expanding? Because, of course, the UK is a big market on its own, like you were just saying, and there are sort of these nice aspects to it that made it a great place to get started. But how do you think about expanding when you are working in the grand scheme of things, like a relatively small market that isn't as car-centric as some other places you could be operating in?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And the temptation is always there to expand. And we would love to bring the experience and the product that we've built to other countries. Right now, we're really focused on the UK still. And although we're driving some quite big scale that I sort of mentioned earlier, we're still a fairly small market share in terms of overall car transactions in the UK. So there's a lot of headroom there. This is the first point. The second thing is I don't feel like we've fully built the whole end-to-end experience yet for Motorway. For us, it's really important we stay laser focused on doing that before we go outside of the kind of UK borders. And what I mean when I say that is built a lot of the product to onboard dealerships, get them signed up, get them buying. We've built the daily auction and the way for them to bid and look at vehicles. And we've built all of the apps to help customers discover us and profile their car and track their sale. But we haven't yet built a lot of the driveway experience. And we're just getting started with things like our payments platform, our transportation service. And our vision for it really is a complete end-to-end experience where you start downloading our app and get a valuation for your car. And it ends on the driveway with a Motorway experience and the payment and everything handled through our platform. So that's kind of important to us that we sort of build that out and build market share in the UK as well. The other thing to say about this is for marketplace businesses, you really want to have that flywheel going where as you bring in a seller who's selling their car, it starts to pull in other dealerships because they hear that there's more vehicles for sale. And you get that really nice flywheel and it kind of snowballs and you have like everyone coming to sell on your website and every dealer buying through your platform. It's tricky to do that, although we're well capitalized. If we're trying to do that in two places at once, you're almost slowing the flywheel in the original location. So that's kind of how we think about it. As entrepreneurs often have like lots of pressure or self-inflicted pressure to feel like you've got to raise the next round, we've got to go to the next country or the next territory. And I know that's exciting, but it's equally be exciting and impactful to just really stay focused on your core market and deliver the job.
No, that's why I thought it was interesting for exactly what you just said. We have companies on here all the time where half the questions we ask them are centered around like, why did you expand to this geography so quickly? Or like, why did you add on this additional revenue stream so quickly? Yeah, it's interesting to hear the other side of being like, no, it actually kind of does make sense for us to focus here for at least a while to like get it right.
Yeah, we've seen, even in our own industry, we've kind of seen examples of other companies that did go really hard and fast at expansion. A lot of the time, most of the time, they've had to kind of contract and come back. So I guess we're trying to play a bit of a longer game where we build it in the UK and get it really, really good and then take it out.
Yeah. And I know you guys have obviously seen traction thus far, but I was definitely curious, what has demand been like from dealers in particular? Is this something you found car dealers were really looking for? They'd wanted something like this, some kind of technology solution like this. What was it like getting them on board? Because you guys have seen traction, but as you mentioned, are kind of just scratching the surface as far as the market share goes.
Yeah. I'd say to begin with, it was really supply driven. So rather than trying to kind of sell dealers on a new process or a new technology or new software, it was more kind of showing them the benefit. So we would go and visit dealerships and, we'd literally get on the road and be on planes, trains and automobiles going into dealerships. And instead of trying to pitch them the software, we just sort of open up our auction. We'd show them the stock and they'd go on there. And I don't know how many, cars we had back then, maybe even like 100 a day or a small amount. But you'd show them this and the dealer's eyes would light up because they'd be like, oh my God, you have one of these and you've got 4 of those. And I've been looking to buy one of those for however long. Because dealerships are typically used to having to go out and find the stock in auctions, or they're relying on trade-ins. So they're relying on kind of pot luck. You're going to turn up with your car and it's a car that they want to buy. So that was a lot of the initial growth, was just sort of being really supply driven and showing them the stock. And then they were willing to kind of do the behavior change and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'll sign up to this Motorway thing instead of going to my car auction where I see my friends and have a bacon sandwich every morning. And I'll try this online product. Then I think we kind of got them hooked and they realized this was much more efficient. They had much more choice. They could just bid on the stuff they wanted. And, we would provide all the information they need so they didn't end up purchasing a car that didn't work out for them.
You talk about the traction, and I want to go back again to the beginning, especially as you mentioned earlier, we're deciding, listen, we need to sort of do this pivot. What were those first meetings like? Because you say their eyes light up now, but in the beginning, did you have to change your strategy of how you were talking to them? And also, not every founder is like an amazing salesperson. So what did you do? Were you going door to door or were you putting together a team? Walk us through those very early days.
Yeah, well, we had some pretty hacky stuff we were doing. Going way back, we'd covered it from the consumer side. We'd sort of built a product where you could sign up and get a valuation for your car and that kind of thing. We didn't yet have the auction platform. That's quite a big, complicated thing to build, right? So what we did early on, which was really hacky, is we made these kind of static images of each car, a bit like top trumps cards, if you know what those are like. So you kind of have like a little thumbnail picture of the car and then you have all of its sort of spec, like its price and its color and its mileage and that kind of thing. They were just JPEGs, right? Little sort of JPEG kind of playing card sized images. And we had a really small sales team. And what we would do is just give them these static images. And every day they'd jump on WhatsApp or email or call up dealerships. And they'd say, hey, like Sarah, I heard you're looking for Volkswagen Polos. Let me send a few of these over to you and see if they grab you, if they're the kind of stock you're looking for. So it's a really kind of like hacky, scrappy way to just get dealers interested. And then in the early days as well, it was kind of like we'd manage all of the bids manually. So the dealers would call them in and our sales team would be there sort of a bit like on a trading floor, like juggling all these bids coming in and matchmaking the sellers with the dealers. That's like a good example of this sort of scrappy kind of like get to market quickly. We could have spent 6 months building a eBay style auction platform only to find out we hadn't built it the right way. But instead we did this sort of top trumps idea and that got us the feedback that dealers want to buy this stuff and the stock was good. And it started to kind of unpeel the problem in front of our eyes where we were kind of like, okay, so instead of us having to manually send all these vehicles out every day, what if there was a platform where the dealers could see them themselves? And instead of them having to call in their bids all the time, what if we built an online bidding system?
How big was your team at that time in those, as you say, hacky days?
Yeah, we were pretty small. So it was us 3 founders and we had maybe 3 or 4 engineers. I was pretty hands-on. I was still the kind of chief designer, chief architect or whatever. And my two other co-founders as well were kind of juggling all the sales, operations, marketing, growth, all of that stuff. And then we had our sales team, which was a handful of people as well. So less than 15.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to imagine this moment where you're like WhatsApp messaging dealers and what those first interactions were like. I mean, did you have face-to-face with them first and then kind of get them hooked into this? And what was their response like?
Yeah. I mean, it was a mixed bag, right? Certainly there were some dealerships we went to and they couldn't get their head around it and they didn't understand what the technology was all about. And some of them maybe even felt slightly insulted or kind of wondering who the hell were these kind of three kids that had come up from London trying to tell them how to purchase cars. But in there were also the kind of diamonds who were those entrepreneurial companies like us that really wanted to grow their business and sell more cars, but also understood that they would need to develop the customer experience and develop their ways of doing business to help modern consumers.
So you're the scrappy team, you get those diamonds, those folks who kind of get it. But there are so many startups out there that get to that scrappy point, but they have a really hard time scaling.
Mm-hmm.
In part because you have to build this platform while also getting new business through these WhatsApp messages and sort of a little bit more of boots on the ground type of strategy. So what did you do? Were you just like working 100-hour weeks or did you do something different to get to that next level and scale?
Yeah, well, we definitely worked pretty hard and there were definitely a few late nights there. I think, we're definitely fortunate. We were lucky about a few events that happened. Slap bang in the middle of all of this, COVID happened. And that was a really kind of divisive event, I think, for startups. For some, it was a period of immense struggle. For us, it was really tough on a team level and having to have everyone remote and all that kind of thing. But it actually drove a lot of growth in our model because dealerships couldn't open to the public. They could no longer be taking these trade-ins. And consumer sellers weren't able in lockdown to go out and drive their car and take it to a dealership or meet people face to face. So this was like a huge growth lever for us that people could do this activity online. And that was really powerful. And I think it helped open everyone's minds a little bit more to the idea that this activity, which traditionally people said you could never do online, could be done online. But it reminds me a bit again of like early days of the internet when people were sort of saying, well, who'd ever buy clothes online? Or who would ever buy a sofa online? And now we don't think twice about it. But it was that kind of a transformation of sort of making it really easy for consumers to be able to do this and to do it in a non-technical way and making it really great for dealers where they felt like this is actually better than going and seeing the car in the flesh. It's faster, it's more convenient, and I see even more information than I would going and walking around the car. So that was definitely like a big growth ramp for us. And then as we scaled, we raised funding. So we raised starting with a seed round, and then we did a Series A, B, and most recently Series C in 2021. And that enabled two things. It enabled us to grow the product and engineering teams and continue innovating on our platform. But it also enabled us for the first time to really put the brand out there. And that was really exciting because we knew that people that were using the platform loved it. And it was just a case that a lot of people just didn't know about us. And as soon as we kind of took the brand out there on TV and out of home and channels like that, that really kind of lit up and got growth happening as well.
And I want to switch gears a little bit because this, of course, is not your first company, and it's not your second company, nor your third. And it is not your first, second, nor third with the current co-founders that you have either. So I'm definitely curious kind of if you could talk a little bit about how you met these co-founders and how you guys have been able to make it work like time and time again, because I truly could not think of anyone I could start a company with, let alone like multiple successful endeavors.
Yeah. Well, I've been really lucky on this front because I know that for many founders, it's really tough trying to find the co-founder or the technical co-founder or whatever. My story is I grew up in the West Country of England in a kind of rural area way back in the 90s. And I first sort of experienced the internet and a kind of light went on in my head. I just got right into building websites. And I think I was 15 when I did my first kind of commercial website for a local company. And things kind of snowballed a bit from there. And I ended up moving to London, working for a really early carbon offset company, a startup. Their idea, this is back in 2002, so really early, but their idea was that you offset your flights or your train travel or your driving by planting trees. I joined this company as their sort of contracted web designer when I was just 17 and was doing kind of some cool projects with them. And one day I met this guy, Tom, who was working there as an account manager, I think. And we got paired up together to try and build this idea of an online carbon calculator. So this is back in the days of Flash, where you'd load up this sort of Flash website and you type in, I take 3 flights per year and my commute's however many miles. And we made this sort of web app or Flash app, and it would sort of spit out at the end of it, oh, well, you use this many tons of carbon and you should be planting 5 trees and this will offset. So it was a really kind of early example of sort of product design and development. And through that, I got working with this guy, Tom, who's now my co-founder, and his friend, Alex, who he went to university with. It was just a really exciting time. I think that the first time we met, it just kind of clicked and it didn't feel like work or, I don't know, it just felt fun. We'd be around Tom's flat in the evening. He'd be playing guitar. Alex and I would be, noodling around with something on the internet. And we just kind of went from there. We built a number of small businesses and, some got bigger and a little bit more successful up until the point of Motorway. And I think, what's been really cool with that whole journey is that we've known each other since we've been so young, that we've been through kind of a lot of life together. So we've been through finding partners, getting married, having kids, and we've worked with each other like a huge amount. And we've been on the road together and, we've been together from kind of morning till evening. And what's great about that is that we've had every argument possible under the sun, and we really know how to kind of like work together now. And that's a really fortunate thing and a really cool thing. So now, Motorway is the biggest thing we've built. It's very different now, but we'll still be up at 7 o'clock in the morning. First thing we'll be doing is like WhatsApping each other about what's on our mind and what's happening in Motorway. So we've got that connection. It's been that. I'd say as well, the other thing that really worked for this is that we had our sort of 3 strengths. So Tom's strength is very much like the overall company vision, the drive to have impact. He's very strong commercially, very strong with people and relationships. Alex was our kind of growth expert, really understood consumers, consumer intent and marketing and all this kind of thing. And then I kind of tried to take care of the technology and the product. So we had these sort of 3 really complementary aspects, I guess, to the 3 of us working in the founding team. And I think that's also part of the reason that this worked.
More from this conversation right after a quick break.
This episode is presented by Brex, the financial stack founders can bank on. Brex knows cash is king for startups, so they built a banking experience that takes every dollar further. Unlike traditional business banking solutions, Brex has no minimums and no transaction fees, and you can get 20 times the standard FDIC protection. Even better, you can earn industry-leading yields from your first dollar while still being able to access your funds anytime. Get the business account trusted by 1 in 3 U.S. startups at brex.com/techcrunch24.
So going back to the time where you were sitting around and imagining, the guitar playing, and I guess the UK equivalent of building a startup in your garage in Silicon Valley, right? And it sounds quite nice. When you were spitballing ideas, though, there must have been a ton of them that just never saw the light of day, or that you tried a little bit of an effort towards and just failed. Do you remember any of those? I would love to know some of the ones that just didn't quite rise to the business occasion, I guess.
Definitely. And I think, again, that's part of like the close founding team, is that you can be kind of vulnerable around each other and you can come up with these wacky ideas that could be really stupid, and you can do it and you can kind of get naked and it's not awkward. But yeah, around the time we started Motoway, what we did actually is we didn't have any money at all. And we needed a space to work from. So we managed to find a derelict hospital in Camden Town in North London, which was going to be demolished. And the local council were kind of offering out office space in there to local startups as, for like really not much money at all. So we moved in there. We had a hospital ward to ourselves. And this place was completely derelict. It had like pigeons nesting in it. It had been kind of taken over by, homeless people for a while. It was freezing cold. But we forced ourselves to kind of show up there every morning and get together in a room and figure out what was our next idea going to be. I think we tried something around mobile phone unlocking was one. And we were kind of like, how come everyone's buying the iPhone every year, but if you buy it on one cell provider, it's tagged to that network? And was there a way to unlock that and unlock value in your phone? So that was something we talked about for a couple of weeks and then stopped. We were really interested in kind of online pharmacy and moving healthcare online. That didn't go anywhere because we realized there was sort of tons of regulation needed. Then we started with the cars idea. So it's really sort of like very generative and the kind of safe creative space where you could really try out these things and talk about these things until you kind of hit on something that might work.
So you have this safe space, but as someone who, and I think Becca could say the same, we've interacted with lots of founders, and it's always interesting when they create this little bubble, this really cool, like sort of brain trust, but then the outside world, friends and family are just like, what are you doing? So was there skepticism in the early days, even when it came to starting Motorway? At that point, you had already a lot of success, but were people questioning your direction in those very early entrepreneurial moments before you really had a success?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'd invite people around to this derelict hospital and, they'd walk up the cold stone steps and be kind of like, this guy's okay. They kind of lost the plot. That definitely happened. And I think, we questioned ourselves a lot as well. At that point, we had families and, it was serious. We needed to make it work. But I think that's where you've got to have a bit of resilience, a bit of belief in yourself, and you've got to try and back yourself. And I think we always sort of knew there was a safety net that, maybe we could try and go and get a job or do something if that wasn't going to happen. But yeah.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about, because this isn't your first company, what is something that you learned from one of these earlier companies that you were like, yes, that worked. We're using that again. We're using that strategy, or sort of like baking that into Motorway as well. And on the flip side, what's something you guys did earlier that when you were building Motorway, you were like, that wasn't our best decision. We're not going to do that this time around.
So I think the stuff that's carried through from business to business has been some of the fundamentals about how I think you do product right. And to your point, Kirsten, just then about, friends and family and stuff, when you get started, you just don't have any access to customer research. You don't have any data. You don't have all of this stuff, right? And one of the easiest ways to get through that is to just build a product that you want to use yourself and solve a problem that's bugging you personally. And that's something we did with a lot of our earlier businesses. We had a fairly big comparison site for cell phones and internet connections. It was born out of this sort of frustration of like, why is it so hard to figure out a good cell phone deal? And, which provider should you go with? And which is the fastest internet provider and all this kind of thing. So it really just sort of starts by scratching an itch and solving a problem that you want to solve for yourself. And typically, if you do that, you'll find other people feel the same way as you. And if you're doing it in something big, like cars or travel or, a big category, then there's probably a lot of people that are feeling that way too. That's really important. And I think how we've carried that forward in Motorway now, we're much bigger and we have access to all of those resources and that kind of thing. But it's to stay really true to the customer's needs. And I really believe, particularly as a product founder, so it's maybe different if you're the CEO or something else, but as a product founder, if you stay really, really close to your customers and be sure that you're just solving a customer problem, a real customer need, in a kind of a magical and different way, then a lot of the rest of the stuff will take care of itself. The growth will take care of itself. People will hear about it, or they'll spread the word and they'll come and use your product. And then, you'll have conversations with VCs because they want to put money in and so on, and all that stuff happens. So I think that's a really important principle that we had from the beginning. And also something around simplicity. I mean, you guys are both writers, so you probably know that phrase about kill your darlings, which is when you're writing something, like force yourself to like remove a character, take out a paragraph, because it just makes what's left behind so much more impactful. And that's something which we try and do a lot. It can be really painful when these days we put a team on something and they've spent months and they're really talented people and they've built something really cool and executed well, but it's just not quite there. It's not the right time to do it. It's not the right focus for the business. You've got to like stop that and put all your resource around the main thing, which is something we always did in our early businesses as well. So those two things are really key. Something we didn't do in our early businesses and did learn through Motorway has really been about, I think, team and culture. The businesses I built before were never more than 40 people. And when a business is that size, you kind of, you know everyone pretty well and you can directly manage or work with everyone. With Motorway, we're north of 400 people now, so much bigger. And at that point, you've got to be really great at leadership or management. And if you're an entrepreneur like me, and you maybe don't have that experience or that skill set, you really need the culture that's going to carry that. So if you can create an environment where people like-minded want to work in similar ways, care about similar things, that's made a huge difference in Motorway and being able to scale that to such a large number of people while still keeping a lot of the same principles and approach to product.
I'm really interested in building that culture. 400 people is a lot. And there's been a lot of talk over recently about like manager mode and founder mode and, all of this. So you are an entrepreneur. Talk to me about some of the mistakes you made in the beginning and how you've corrected that, just specifically with when Motorway hit that 400 mark and maybe you had to personally change your style a little bit.
Yeah. I think maybe one mistake is getting away from the coalface and getting away from execution. When your company does get big, there is some of that stuff around, you should be a leader now. You should be removed from the sort of day-to-day stuff and focusing purely on the strategic, and you should bring in lots of people to help run the company for you. And there's no black or white answer to this. It's really important that you do need those people to come in because they're going to bring experience and ability to scale and leadership skills, which you don't necessarily have as a founder. But at the same time, it's really important that you don't lose sight of the main thing and you're still working really closely right down on the ground floor. So still meeting customers, still joining those engineering and product sessions, even getting hands-on with the code and the design if you need to. Because if you don't lose that, I think there's a risk that you kind of lose sight of how the business actually feels and works, what people are feeling in that culture. And you risk losing touch with your customers as well. So that's definitely been a learning for me. And in some ways, it's about kind of going back to that now that we're bigger. It's actually going back to that sort of hands-on way of working and keeping really focused on teams and how we build.
So the most important question as we wrap this up, thank you for joining. And I know you're not a petrol head, as you said, but what car are you driving right now?
Okay, so I'm not a petrol head, but I'm very into Japan and Japanese culture. So I have a Honda E, which is the first electric car I think Honda made. And it's slightly different from their other models. It's a little bit like if Nintendo designed a car. It's all sort of white and marshmallowy, and it's got this kind of cool wooden interior.
That makes me so jealous because I want that car to be sold in the United States, and it's a travesty that it is not. So congratulations on that. I wished that they had brought that here.
We sell a few of them every week on Motorway, so I think you're going to have to make a trip over to the UK at some point.
They're so cute. I'm looking at it right now. Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
And that was our conversation with Harry. But before we dive too far into the conversation, Kirsten, what was the lie?
Here is the lie. The Motorway team previously considered launching a smartphone unlocking app and grocery delivery service. In actuality, they thought about launching an online pharmacy.
It's so interesting, though, to think about because this founding team has launched so many companies together. I mean, maybe they talked about launching a grocery delivery service at some point. The amount of ideas they've probably gone through that he didn't even mention is probably crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually the hardest part about coming up with Two Truths and a Lie was thinking through probably all the different startup ideas that he just didn't mention. That was really interesting to me about this whole founding story, which is you and Dom have talked a lot of founders who are serial entrepreneurs. I feel like these guys are in a little bit of a different category.
For sure.
They met in an interesting way, and they have had, 5, maybe more startups, this one being their most successful, and they don't seem to be done.
Yeah. Anytime people are able to launch a company successfully together, I always think to myself where I'm like, if I were to launch a company, like who would I launch one with? And I literally come up with like 0 answers. I can't even think of who I would even have on my Amazing Race team, which I have thought about an embarrassing amount of times. Because people always talk about like founder market fit too. So it's interesting that's like these guys decided to work together. Not only did it work the first time, but then it kept working for all of these different ideas. You read about founder breakups all the time. And half the time it's founders that if you read their backgrounds, read how they knew each other and stuff, you would never think it would happen. It just shows that, I don't know, some of it's kind of random.
Well, and hard, right? When we were interviewing them, really what hit me was they grew up together. they started doing this as young people, and now they all have families, are married, have partners. And that's pretty substantial and significant when you think about sort of how you change as a person during that time, how your priorities change. And I kept thinking back to like storied long-term rock bands and like what kept them together, because there's drama and there's risk and, celebrity even, and money, all the things that could completely just blow up. Well, I think it's just special and rare.
No, I really like that analogy too of the rock star piece of it, because it's true. It's like, just because you're good at playing music together doesn't mean you're going to be, the best group of people to navigate these different hurdles and challenges that face the whole group. Yeah, we had a founder on recently, a couple of weeks ago, who met her co-founders sitting next to each other on a bus. It's so interesting to me, like how these people get together and when it works and when it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. I think the important thing that he hit on a couple times in a few different ways was sort of how they are constantly sort of talking and iterating and thinking through ideas, but then, picking one and going for that. Obviously, they've had some that they scrapped. Motorway being probably the one that they've committed the most and seen the most growth with, right? I think that they have several hundred employees now, 400 employees now. To me, it'll be really interesting to watch what they do from here, because now we're in like big time scale growth mode. And are any of them going to peel off and go do a different project? I mean, there's definitely didn't seem like there was any indication that that was going to happen. Or do they like do another startup? So I'll be tracking their careers closely.
Yeah, especially because what you just mentioned, like, of course, this is not their first nor second rodeo, but this company has been able to grow to a level of scale that the past ones didn't, despite being successful on their own. But, people talk about that with leadership too. And, you can be an early stage startup CEO, but can you be a public company CEO? Can you be a growth stage company CEO? Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to think of how they've had all these experiences together, and where the company's headed, it's going to just be a completely different new experience.
Yeah. Well, I do feel confident that they will continue, not just because they've managed to make it this far, but I did like how Harry was talking about scaling. We so often hear a company raise funds, they've got revenue coming in, but they need to raise even more funds so that they can scale. And they'll often go after that, like hit as many markets as humanly possible, which, you're really burning through capital. Harry and Motorway and his co-founders seem very much focused on the UK, as opposed to maybe breaking into other parts of Europe or the US. He didn't completely discount it.
Right.
But he seemed focused on, hey, we've got some success. We're not done here. To me, I like that more conservative. It was refreshing to hear that, I guess. And to me, that increases their chances of survival and, notably sticking together.
For sure. And you're totally right, because we've had companies on before that have expanded really fast, and not necessarily by geography, but we've had like D2C companies that expanded to retail within like their first year. That's such a quick way to add another revenue stream. But it was nice hearing him say that, because you do think about it, companies that expand so fast, like, do you actually know if you have the product market fit to be a large company in any of those areas? In theory, no. You know that you can drop down into an area and get a substantial amount of business, but a substantial enough for what they're looking for, investors are looking for, et cetera. No, they expand before they actually know that. And so it is refreshing to hear of a company being like, no, we want to have meaningful market share, someone to know that this actually works as it's intended to before we even consider like moving it somewhere else.
Well, and you just reminded me something that I can't believe I forgot about before, but in terms of scale, was thinking about where they started. So the company has pivoted a little bit. Originally, there wasn't sort of this auction piece. Dealers weren't really like a big component, and now it is. But to get dealers signed up, their marketing and their sales strategy was WhatsApp and reaching out to dealers. And like to think that they now have grown to this 400-person company is kind of remarkable. Is like, granted, texting isn't analog, but it's certainly more analog than like a sophisticated sales and marketing team.
Right. And I think it's so interesting, too, that they did make that pivot and kind of did end up with the strategy they did today. Because I know when I first started looking into this company before we were talking about having them on the show, in my head, I was like, oh, it's the Carvana of the UK. And then I looked into it and I was like, no, it's not the Carvana of the UK. They're doing something totally different. Well, not totally different. Same realm, a little bit different.
Same realm, yeah.
But the fact that they cut out that piece where it's like they don't own any of the cars is, I think, huge. Because I feel like now that the car markets aren't as crazy as they were 2-3 years ago, like that's something that is definitely hurting businesses like Carvana, because it's like they are in charge of the inventory, which is costly to store and costly to keep. And it's very different from this marketplace model where it's like things just flow through them, but they don't hold anything.
So for years, I covered the peer-to-peer used car marketplace, and there's been a ton of companies that have, risen and fallen and no longer exist. Carvana still exists and is publicly traded, but they are not what you would call an asset-light business, right? They hold inventory, they refurbish the vehicles, they deliver the vehicles. They even have in their most important markets massive structures that look like a car vending machine.
Those things look crazy.
This is very different than what Motorway is doing. I think also smartly, they looked at the fact that there was just a lot of software platforms out there already that were like used car marketplaces. I mean, to try and compete with a company like AutoTrader, for instance, it's like, that's pretty hard. So working with the dealers and making it more of like, in a way, a B2B play, I think it's smart because dealers oftentimes, now they're catching up, but a lot of dealers were behind technologically speaking, and we're looking for ways to like capture more customers or to find inventory. And so this is a way of like serving the B2B market and then of course helping the consumer and the customer, the B2C market. So we'll see how it evolves from here. Like if they move away from asset light, I don't think that they will.
No.
But I guess stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they did, but like I said, I saw it and I was like, oh, I already know what this business model is. And it's like, no, they found this like weird little piece of the market that people weren't really paying attention to or weren't really building software for, of the fact that these dealers were going to these in-person auctions. And that's crazy. And like, why don't we move that online? And I'm not surprised that like once they got that messaging across and kind of made that pivot and started focusing in that area, that they did see relatively quick traction, because that sounds like that was maybe the last piece that these dealers didn't have technology for.
Yeah. One more other item to note before we wrap. I guess two. One, I did enjoy like all the little Britishisms.
Oh,
so
yes.
Listeners, just like see if you can pluck them out. There were a couple of times I was like, "Aw." And the other one was, I thought that he was pretty honest about the mistakes that they've made and sort of walking through that mindset. I don't know if you caught on to that as well.
Yeah. We've definitely had founders on before who have founded like multiple companies, and some of them weren't even successful. And you ask them about mistakes and they like don't really have good answers. And you're kind of like, oh, come on. Like that level of humility is like, why not? If you know you're successful now, it's like, what's the harm in talking about the mistakes and helping someone, avoid making them themselves? So I did think he was really candid about the things that worked that they were able to bring along with them and the stuff that didn't.
Well, it's sort of like every time I interview a founder and I ask them about their competition, and I, of course, know who their competition is. And, I get the stock answer, like, we don't really have competition, or the same question, like you mentioned, what have you learned? And they're like, well, they don't have much to say. That is actually two huge red flags for me,
sure.
Because it means that they're like, either they don't want to share it, right? Or they're trying to be secretive, or they don't know it. But two bad scenarios. I think that any successful startup founder will say over and over again, like so many failures led to this point. That's how you learn. That's how you iterate. That's the whole process of building a startup.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's good he acknowledges the mistakes, but it seems like they're really learning from them, because Motorway seems to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.